All right, welcome everybody to another exciting episode of Under the Dome. I'm your host, Allen Ulrich, here with Bob Rose. And in honor of the man coming back, I once again have my Jimmy Graham jersey on, and I put on the back screen here the Jimmy Graham game. This is the one, I believe, where he dunks over the goal and bends it. I think this is the game. I don't remember the year. I thought it was 2011, but regardless, I got a Jimmy Graham game going on, and of course they put a commercial in the middle of it, bastards. How you doing tonight, Bob?
John, Alan, I'm good. He's still kind of in disbelief at the Jimmy Graham news, but that wasn't the only news of the day. It was extremely exciting, an extremely exciting day if you're a Saints fan, an extremely busy day. If you were at Saints headquarters, no doubt, and certainly if you're one who covers the team. Jimmy Graham was only a drop in the bucket compared to what happened. As you know, this morning the Saints also signed two offensive linemen, five-time Pro Bowl guard Trai Turner, and eight-year starting guard Max Garcia. So they have some solid offensive line depth. To make room for these three moves, the Saints had to move two people off the roster because remember last week they had released Billy Price, so they did already have one free spot. The other two spots they created was they released tight end Morris Forrestal and offensive lineman Coda. Oh God, hold on. Coda Martin was also released. So the Saints are under the 90-man roster when training camp officially opens tomorrow afternoon.
Well, okay, so we'll talk about Jimmy Graham in a minute, but let's just talk about the two guards first. Trai Turner and Max Garcia. It seems to me that we've talked about this before. We talked a lot about it during the offseason. We were concerned about the depth on the team, especially at the guards, because, like you said, it's always a question of when Pete gets hurt, not if he gets hurt. These two moves are Jimmy Graham doing a hurdle right there. Here's a Jimmy Graham touchdown. Wide open. And then he does the dunk. This is not the one when he hangs off the goal, though, unfortunately. But anyway, how do you view these moves? Do you view these moves as just camp bodies or guys that, really have a shot at making the final 53 and maybe not pushing for a starting job, but the guys that they want to go to right away if or when Pete gets hurt?
I definitely view them as more than just camp bodies. I don't know. I don't know about you guys. I got sick and tired when injuries just battered the Saints offensive line in the last 2 or 3 years. They were only like two bodies into having to start formerly undrafted guys. And, and sometimes that turned out okay. But it's an awful big roll of the dice. I know Calvin Throckmorton was undrafted and he's been a little bit better than serviceable. But I have zero doubt in my mind that the Saints have upgraded certainly the depth along the interior offensive line. Because, remember Trai Turner, he's a 5-time Pro Bowler. He's maybe not at the peak of his career anymore, and has been with I think 3 teams in the last 4 years or something like that. But even with Washington last year, he started for most of the season. And when the Saints brought him in for a visit yesterday, there were some people that that messaged me and asked me if there was a good chance that they'd sign him. And I said at that time, I thought that there would be a good chance. I thought that it would be a wise move on the team's part. But I also looked at it from Turner's perspective. From Turner's perspective, you're coming in probably at least initially as a backup. But Andrus Peat, we all know Pete's injury history. Specifically, you're talking about a player who's missed 40 games in his 8 years. including 19 in the last 2 years. So if I'm Trai Turner, I'm looking at that. I'm saying, you know what? I got a real good chance to see the field early, and I got a real good chance of seeing the field a lot. Because not only, aside from Pete, you have Cesar Ruiz, who I thought Ruiz was their most consistent lineman last year, but a foot injury ended his year and rehab extended well into the offseason. And Ruiz has had one good year out of 3 seasons. So is Cesar going to continue that upward trend? We certainly hope so, and I think he probably will. But again, if you're someone like Trai Turner or Max Garcia, also an experienced starter, I'm looking at this situation and I'm thinking, you know what? Even if I come in as a backup, I got a good shot to play. Garcia, I would put better odds on Turner making the team than Garcia, but I'm not going to say Garcia is a camp body either. I mean, this is a guy who started 7 or 8 games for Arizona last year, was a major contributor for early in his career, to the Broncos Super Bowl 50 championship team, and Arizona's playoff team a couple of years ago. So this is a solid player too. I don't know if I would make either one of them upgrades over Throckmorton, but at the very least, I'd say they're on an even playing field, and more so, that also allows the team to use James Hurst at tackle if necessary. So if you have a couple injuries along the front line, I've said all along, Hurst is better suited at guard. Excuse me, man. Sorry. But we know that James can play either tackle spot. And, we also know that Trevor Penning is at least penciled in as the starter at left tackle, but he's unproven. And he's already had a couple semi-major injuries. So, Hurst is just one injury away from having to be used at tackle as well. That just increases, the signing of Turner and Garcia increases both the depth, the skill, and the versatility across the entire line.
And I'm glad you said that, because that's kind of where I'm going with this too, because my attitude is that I think Dennis Allen looked at the end of last year's offensive line, where you're starting Landon Young at guard, and you got an undrafted guy who was off the street basically at center, and kid. You the people that you're putting in line, the people you're putting in that offensive line for the stretch run, really, Allen's like, you know what? I'm not going through this again. We've got the room. I want veterans in there. Maybe they're not 17-game starters, but they are guys that I can plug in at critical points in the season, and I'm not seeing this significant drop-off like I will with an undrafted free agent or some guy we're signing off the street in week 12.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I see these moves, and I don't think they're finished. I think that's fine too. I saw they had a bunch of names. I didn't know them, but a bunch of names listed for defensive tackles and defensive ends they brought in. The only name I jokingly recognized was a guy by the name of Tommy Kramer, who is not the quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings from the 80s. But yeah, the rest of them, I didn't know who they were. I hadn't heard of these guys before. Do you have anything on these guys?
No, I don't. And I'm like you. As a matter of fact, over the weekend, I actually published a piece, highlighting some still available free agents, at some of these positions, at offensive line, defensive tackle, a couple names at defensive end, a list of names at linebacker. Now a lot of them are names we all recognize. Legitimate NFL starters that are surprisingly still available. And like you said a minute ago, Dennis Allen knows he has salary cap space, even with today's moves. Today's moves don't put a big dent in that. You look at a position like defensive tackle, where they brought in a list of those names. We all believe that Garcia is going to do well. We all believe that Saunders and Shepard are upgrades over what they had last year. But what if they're not? Defensive tackle was an absolute albatross for this defense last year,
Mm-hmm.
and it's quite obvious with the previous offseason moves. I mean, you signed 2 free agents and used your number 1 pick. It's quite obvious Dennis Allen recognizes that too. And you had to bring back Malcolm Roach. Didn't have to, but you did after he didn't get any interest on the free agent market. But the fact that they allowed Roach to test free agency in the first place, and they allowed Street, Tuttle, Onyemata to walk out the door, without so much as a wave goodbye. That tells you that they are willing to turn over every stone to try to find skill at that defensive interior.
I agree. I think it's a case of more bodies, more veteran bodies to rotate constantly. I think that's what Allen is looking at. I don't want to have an injury just totally torpedo my season. And that includes Brzee, that includes Shepard, Saunders, all of them. I want to have a guy I can go to on my bench. He may be good for 10 to 12 snaps, but he's somebody that can go in there and call on him on certain situations. I'm not scrambling in week 12 looking at guys that have been sitting on the couch for 6 or 10 weeks. And I'm trying to bring these guys in. A Chris Harris, I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
I think he has had his fill of that. And Sean Payton, I love the man, but I think Sean Payton's attitude was, you know what, I got my stars, and I can fill out the rest with just undrafted guys and cheap players and stuff. My Drew Brees can carry my team. And Dennis Allen's not going to play that game. He's like, I don't have a Drew Brees. I have what I've got, and all I can do is just try and have the best depth that I can go to at any time. So, which now brings us to Jimmy Graham. Graham was a surprise because he hasn't played in a year. In fact, I thought his last game was the touchdown pass he caught with the Bears.
Yeah.
At the very end, dropped on the ground and walked straight out the stadium. I thought that was his last game, and it turns out, that he has come back. He wants to play. He can't wait to play for us. He's 36 years old.
Yep.
It's been almost 10 years since he was last with the Saints, which means this jersey's 10 years old, but that's beside the point. What kind of player are they getting with Jimmy Graham, in your opinion?
Hey, listen, I think all of us are going to be waiting with bated breath to find out the answer to that question. And I know I wasn't alone in thinking this when the news first hit. And we realized it was real, that it wasn't just a one-day contract so I can retire as a Saint. Once we knew it was legitimate, it was hard. Yeah, if you've been a fan of this team for a long time, and you've been a fan of Jimmy Graham, when he was with the Saints, it was hard not to get initially excited and just look at everything through nostalgia-colored glasses. But let's be realistic too. And I said this to people. I said this with Jordy Hultberg earlier today. Jimmy Graham is not a lock to make this team. As you said, he's 36 years old, Alan. He hasn't played football in a year and a half. And even then, he was already well past his prime. He was, and if you ask me, he was a declining player when the Saints traded him. Still effective, but you started to see a little bit of a slide that last year with New Orleans. Jimmy beat people because of a mix of freakish size and freakish athleticism. Now, that athleticism is all but gone. But he's still 6'7". He could still catch the ball. He's still 250, 260 pounds, and knows how to run routes. So while I do say that he's not a lock to make this team, if he does make it, you have to believe that there's a vision for him. And that vision is a situational player. I still believe that if he has any gas left in the tank, that he is going to be most effective down around the red zone where this team struggled last year. I mean, they've struggled, really the last 3 seasons there. It was either Taysom Hill or you end up kicking a field goal. At least that's the way it felt. Jimmy Graham gives you a red zone option, probably 10, 12, 15 snaps a game in situational play, because his blocking hasn't gotten any better. And as I said, his athleticism has declined. I would be surprised if he lined up out wide like we were so fond of seeing with his original stint in New Orleans. He was so effective lined out wide as a wide receiver. I don't know that we'll see a lot of that, but like I said, situational matchups, because he could still, if he can play, he still presents a problem just based off of his size and his experience alone.
I agree with that. I was thinking we had gotten Benjamin Watson at 38 years old, and he was not the Benjamin Watson of the Patriots. He wasn't even the Benjamin Watson of the first time he's with the Saints.
Mm-hmm.
But he was able to catch a couple of touchdown passes. He had 2 of them. He caught, I think, 40 passes for about 300 yards with the Saints in 2018, his last season. If you can get that level of production on a Jimmy Graham, maybe a couple more touchdowns because of his size in the red zone, it's a good bargain. It's a good bargain because what you have around him, you've got, you look at your tight ends, you have one blocking tight end, and that's Foster Moreau, and you've got a pass catching tight end who's a converted wide receiver in Juwan Johnson. You really don't have. No one has a Travis Kelce, but the Chiefs. But you really don't have that elite tight end that's just going to demand so many snaps.
Mm-hmm.
What you have now is a guy that maybe if he is in the shape he can do, shape he has, is come out there and line up in situations and just give you another receiving threat to go with a healthy Michael Thomas, a Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, just somebody who can box out and be a mismatch. And you have a quarterback who has historically struggled in the red zone.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving him more targets, so it's that much harder for him to struggle in the red zone. And who knows, they may run out of that formation too. You put Taysom Hill at quarterback, and you put Graham and Thomas and Olave out there. Maybe, and you got Kamara sitting there too. Are they going to run? Are they going to pass?
Yep.
It becomes a challenge, and that's all you need out of him. Just the threat of him, and he's got to show that he can play like that still. I mean, I'm like everybody else. I got excited and I said, "Man, this is great. We're bringing the band back together again." No, we are not bringing Kobe Fleener because we want somebody who's going to catch a pass. But yeah, it sounds great. You putting the band back together. I mean, this game's 11 years old behind me. This was in 2012. But you're not. It's not going to be the Jimmy Graham we saw in 2013, 2011. He won't be able to jump out of the building. But I just need him to go out there and just catch some first downs, catch some red zone touchdowns. Help this team in the red zone. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, hell, if he has something left in the tank. He hasn't shrunk. He's still 6'7". He still has the skills and the mentality of a basketball player. So down around the end zone, I'm running him on a fade route, a stem route where he could box out, a linebacker or a safety. He's still going to be. the vision for him is probably something along those lines. He's not going to be
Yeah.
taking significant snaps from Foster Moreau. I doubt he takes significant snaps from Jawan Johnson. But if the Saints line up in a 3 tight end package, as Dennis Allen does like to do,
Hmm.
I do theoretically like the look and the thought of Jawan Johnson, Foster Moreau, and Jimmy Graham as those tight ends, rather than any kind of mix of Adam Troutman, or fill in the blank here, Nick Vanette or some of those other guys they've trotted out here in recent years.
And that's really the key, and that's what I keep telling people. Like, well, he's old, he's not going to be able to play, and we don't know if he can play or not. We don't, he may very well go out there and like Des Bryant, tear his Achilles, 2 practices in, and he's done. Um, Ricky Jackson, people forget about this, but Ricky Jackson tried to come back in 1997, Mike Ditka's first
Mhm.
year, to play linebacker in a 4-3 defense too, but try and play linebacker one last time, and he didn't have it anymore. He didn't have the speed, didn't have any of that stuff. It was a feel good story for a while. He played all preseason, but it was obvious once he got out there that Ricky wasn't the Ricky we were used to seeing. Maybe we need to see this with Graham for final closure, but I would like to think that he does have something in the tank, and I'm going to remain optimistic about this. Not that he's going to be a scoring machine, but just somebody who can help this offense because it needs help. Um, Matt asked, "Are we a run first or a pass first team?" How do you
As
read
long
that?
as long as Dennis Allen is the coach, this is not going to be a pass first or a pass heavy football team. It's not that Dennis Allen is coaching with a mentality back in the Stone Age. He just approaches every game with, and you said this many times before, Alan. Dennis wants to win games with field position and his defense. And he has confidence in that
Mhm.
defense. Even last year, when the defensive tackles and the safeties were playing below expectations, and injuries had riddled the cornerback unit, he still didn't let the offense open up. And I know Pete Carmichael got a lot of criticism, and deservedly so. But the final say so for this team's philosophy comes from the head coach. Now they're not going to be a run, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, run, play action, fake, pass team either. They they have all these weapons in, and they brought Derek Carr in for a reason. But anybody that believes that Derek Carr is going to have Drew Brees type of numbers because this is going to be a wide open attack, uh, you got another thing coming.
Yeah.
Dennis Allen is still a conservative by nature, a head coach, and like you have said several times, he has the most confidence in his defense. So he's not going to want to completely open up let Pete Carmichael completely open up the offensive playbook and take a chance that his defense is going to get worn down because the offense gives him a bunch of 3-and-outs.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind too, and that's why I put that. Matt said Jimmy be a fourth receiver. Um, think about how many receivers have we brought on into this onto this team and into this building, trying to find receivers, so we're not going through another Marquez Callaway,
Right.
Traquan Smith. And you have to look at Graham kind of that way. He is just another guy we're bringing in. Let's see what he can do catching the ball, because I'm not going to be stuck with just bag boy at Rouse's, or Publix or HEB or whatever grocery store you can think of, Kroger. I'm not going to be stuck with those guys being my receivers. I want to have legitimate guys who can go and catch the ball.
Mhm.
That way, I will be more willing to go for it on fourth down. I can pick up those because think about how many times his team went 9 or 8 yards on first down. Second down was incomplete pass, so it's third and short, and they don't get it.
Yeah.
That was so unbelievably frustrating, and part of it is because you didn't have the receivers who consistently caught the ball. What do they keep saying? We didn't make our contested catches.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Graham's a guy who's made contested catches. Michael Thomas is a guy who's made contested catches. They want to see guys who can do that.
Yeah.
That way, if I run a quick slant on 3rd and 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, my guy is going to outmuscle whoever it is trying to defend it. And that's how you have to look at these moves that they're making.
Oh, no
It
doubt about it. And I mean, yeah, I love Olave and I love Shaheed, and they're going to do a lot for this offense. But they didn't. They simply didn't have that big physical intermediate receiver. I can't even say Jawan Johnson is that, not consistently anyway.
no.
Michael Thomas is certainly that. Jimmy Graham is certainly that. Foster Moreau is definitely that. Brian Edwards, though he hasn't had a lot of success in this league, the success he's had has been big physical intermediate target. So there's a theme here.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly how I think the team is looking at these guys, is they want somebody who's going to go over the middle. Like I'm watching this game as we're talking, and how many times Marcus Colson goes across that middle and just snags that ball and gets tattooed right
Mm-hmm.
across the middle like that. He does it so often, and that's what the Saints really miss. It's great to have those speed guys who are just going to, take a 10 or 12-yard pass and take it to the house. That's great. That's awesome. It makes for great highlights.
Mm-hmm.
But the guys who move the chains for your offense, that's the guys that this team has been missing for, I want to say, at least since 2016, 2015. I think Willie Snead, his breakout year is probably your last not outside of Thomas, of course, but your last physical guy, slot receiver who came across the middle and really caught the ball in heavy traffic. And of course, he was only good for a year. Johnny Patrick,
Mm-hmm.
you suck. Great coverage, Johnny Patrick, number
And,
32.
and yeah, I mean, your Brandon Cooks, your Ted Gins, your Lance Moores, your Devery Hendersons. I love
Mhm.
all those guys. Their jobs were made more effective. Their jobs were made easier by guys like Jimmy Graham, Marcus Colston, Michael Thomas, Jeremy Shockey, players like that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's the key to how you look at the rest of these moves, because I think they do bring in more receivers. I think
Mm-hmm.
they're going to keep looking for that guy who is going to be that contested receiving guy. Um, the Hunter Renfro stuff keeps coming up, but there's nobody in the league talking about it. It's more fan sites
Mm-hmm.
that keep talking about Hunter Renfro and is he going to make the
Yeah.
team? What's going to happen with him? But Hunter Renfro is another kind of guy that they probably look at to get contested catches. So, to me, this is an incredible play by Jimmy Graham to catch this, to run this play down after that fumble. Anyway, yeah. So I think they're still looking for people, and they're going to look at the final cuts too, and see who gets cut
Oh yeah.
loose, and see who they can bring in for that position as well. So I do believe, though, to answer your question, Matt, they are a run first team still, but they don't want to be locked into a running team. Okay, so one other question I wanted to ask you tonight. So you have Michael Thomas been cleared 100% to participate in all team activities. I saw Kendra Miller and Salvadori both got cleared. They passed their physicals. Does this mean that some of these guys will be coming off the PUP list or non-football injury list and probably practice right away? Or how do you think this is going to go?
I don't know about right away. It wouldn't surprise me, folks, if the first couple days, maybe as long as a week, some of these guys remained on the injury list that they are on. But the fact that they were medically cleared means, as you pointed out, Alan, that they can be taken off at any point in time. Which is certainly good news for not only the player but the team in general. Especially the fact that all the guys that you mentioned, Kendre Miller, Salvaderi, A.T. Perry, they are all new players, so you want them on the field as quickly as possible. Miller and Perry to get all of them to get used to the offense, to get used to Derek Carr, to get used to Pete Carmichael's playbook. So the sooner they come off, obviously, the better it is for everybody involved. And I do. It may not happen, like I said, in the first day or two. So don't be shocked, folks, if it doesn't. Don't hit that panic button. But since they are medically cleared, I would be a little bit surprised if they weren't on the practice field before at least the end of the weekend.
I feel the same way. I think that these guys, as Sean Payton used to like to say, will be back sooner rather than later. Um, so I think they will probably, once they get into the padded practices and things, you're going to start seeing these guys come in. And even though Thomas is medically cleared, I still think they treat him like a veteran. You, you're going to participate in most of the walkthroughs. You're not going to do a whole lot in the padded practices. You're mostly going to be out there running when we run 7-on-7 and that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't need to see that you get the crap kicked out of you in practice. It's
Right.
just not needed. So, um, I expect to see a lot of that, and I expect to see a lot of the young players getting the bulk of the snaps in these practices. I think they know what they've got with, obviously the key veterans. But I think it's really what they're going to want to work on is these young guys, the depth guys. These, excuse me, these are the guys that they're going to really push hard in the camp. Because these are the guys they want to see. Can you play? What are you going
Mm-hmm.
to do out there? If we've got to rely on you, this is where. And also, a guy like Trevor Penning, who is coming back from injury, I think he gets a ton of snaps too, because he needs the experience.
Yeah, I don't
Is
think
that
there's
how
any
you see
doubt
this?
about that. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The more reps Penning gets, the better, the quicker he is going to develop, especially as a pass blocker, where a lot of people are concerned. So yeah, I think Penning gets a lot of reps. I agree with what you said about not only Michael Thomas, but Olave, and maybe even to some extent Shaheed too. You want them working with Derek Carr and the 7-on-7s to build chemistry, but outside of that, the rest of these guys, none of those other receiver spots are locks. Whether it's A.T. Perry, a veteran who's been around the system like Traquan, James Washington, Brian Edwards, those guys are fighting for not only the potential number 3 or number 4 receiver spot, but just to make the roster in general. So that's where you're going to see these practices starting to get chippy. When the number 2s are on the field against maybe the number 1s of the opposing defense, because you're not going to want to run Michael Thomas ragged. You're not going to want to risk an injury to Olave, or for that matter, Lattimore, or some of the number 1s on the other side. That's not to say that that the vets are going to have it easy, but I'd say with a guy like Michael Thomas, if I'm Dennis Allen, I almost handle him with kid gloves, because until Michael Thomas stays healthy, I have no guarantee that he'll be healthy. So my mindset is, if I only have Michael Thomas for a limited number of snaps before he gets hurt again, I'm not going to want to waste those snaps in a training camp practice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you're going to see a lot of Alante Taylor and Paulson Adebo out there at the corners. They want to see if where those guys fit in,
Mm-hmm.
who, what's the best side for them, and let them compete against these receivers and see if they're up for the number two guy. You know what a guy like Lattimore can do. So you want to see if Taylor and Adebo could be the number two guy, maybe play the nickel, but mainly you just want to get these guys the experience they need.
Hmm.
So I think, and the reason why I bring all this stuff up is because I know how fans are, especially on Twitter, when they see the so-called starters out there, and oh, Bracy's not out there. Look, they got Peyton Turner out there playing
Right.
defensive tackle. He was a bust draft pick. He must be hurt.
Right.
That kind of thing. Or oh, so and so may be in danger of his job. Not
Hmm.
getting his job back because they got Trey Turner in at left guard. It's that kind of stupid stuff, and it's like, no, man, that's not what's going on. They're trying these guys out with different combination of starters and backups to see how they do. So evaluate them. It's all about getting the snaps on film.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And you're not gonna want to run your veterans ragged, because it is a long season. And remember too, they're going to they have the luxury of inter squad scrimmages before not just one but two of their preseason games against both the Chargers and the Texans. That's when you're going to see all hands on deck. Everybody that is healthy enough to suit up, because those are game type situations. That's when you're going to want to roll out your Michael Thomas, your Marshawn Lattimore, your Demario Davis, etc. Outside of that, you don't want anybody to go down with a freak injury, in training camp practice that's going to send you scrambling to the waiver wire and potentially cost you your season.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too is you're down to three preseason games. This will be the third year that we've had just three preseason games, and I still don't think the coaches quite have a. This will be interesting to see how this plays out. They don't quite have a grip on how do I handle three preseason games, because it used to be okay. First preseason game, my starters play about a quarter. Second
Mm-hmm.
preseason game, they may play a quarter and a half. Third preseason game, they play maybe, depending on how many snaps I get, they probably play until the first or second possession of the second half. And then the
Mm-hmm.
fourth preseason game, it's all backups and guys fighting for jobs. COVID was the first year we went to 17 games, so that was odd. Last year was the first regular season without the protocols. And I think this year, Allen's probably going to have a better plan on how he's going to run his starters in these preseason games. And I think training camp and these scrimmages that he has with the Chargers and the Texans, right? It's those
Mm-hmm.
two teams he's scrimmaging against. Is it?
You're breaking up, but it is the Chargers and the Texans, if that's what you asked.
Yeah, I was just asking about the scrimmages that they have, the week of practice and the scrimmages they're going to have with those guys. And I thought it was those two guys. I thought so.
It is. It is, and they'll have two practice sessions
Yeah.
against
So
both teams in each
I think
instance.
those practices. Yeah, and I think it's those scrimmages where you'll see a lot more starters out there playing, and not so much in the preseason games, which is kind of strange because as a fan you don't get to see it, but
Right.
that's where they're going to do the real evaluation in how they do in these scrimmages, because it's much more controlled. Because they want to see specific things, goal line situations,
Mm-hmm.
2-minute drills, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, and they even bring in officiating crews,
All right.
for at least one of those too. So it is as close to a game
Mhm.
situation as the number one seed during the preseason.
and it's much more controlled. In other words, it's not a game where you kind of you dictate how the game actually unfolds. You're in control of the game. You can say, all right, you know what we're going to work on right now? A 2 minute drill. Balls at the 20-yard line. Let's
Hmm.
run the plays and let's see how we do. And the same with them. They get to do the same thing. Oh, we're going to do it. We're just line up the ball at the 5, the 10, the 15, the 20. We're running red zone plays and red zone defenses. It's much more of that than a regular game situation where they may never get to that point where they
Hmm.
got to go, because of a blown coverage, they got a big play and okay, that blew my opportunity. I can't run my goal line offense now because I didn't get down there, you know. So that's why they like these things. Um, and they can also control the intensity a little bit more because
Yeah.
it's not quite a game. Although, Jim Moore, I was just thinking about this because the Chiefs are playing in the background. Now, this is 2004, but the Chiefs preseason scrimmage that they ran back up in La Crosse, Wisconsin. You know which one I'm talking about, right? Jim
Hmm.
Moore's famous blow up
Hmm.
where the Stowers blow up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about horse shit ball carrying and things like that. You know, that was a scrimmage, and the Chiefs really took it to the Saints in that scrimmage. And that team won 12 games later that season.
Hmm.
Um, but it just goes to show you the difference between training camp back then versus training camp now, and how much more controlled it is. Um, Bob, what's the weather like up there right now where you live outside of
Uh,
Pittsburgh?
it's high 80s. I- it's high 80s and fairly humid for this area. But it always cracks me up when people in this area of the country, bitch and complain about the humidity. Because I've spent a lot of time down in the Gulf Coast region. I've spent a lot of time, up and down the East Coast beaches, where it gets real humid, down through the Carolinas and into Florida. And I laugh at people here, openly laugh at them when they talk about humidity. But it's nowhere near as oppressive as it is down there. The heat index, they like to call it the heat index now, instead of humidity. I don't know
Yeah.
what the difference is, but I know they both feel the same. No, what yeah, the heat that we have is nowhere near what you guys experience. Your cooler days are like our hotter days up here typically.
Well, and it's definitely the humidity. Well, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we've had, I hesitate to say the word unusually hot because that's not accurate. We've had an unusually dry
Mm.
summer, which is, we normally get rain every day in the
Hmm.
afternoon, at least for an hour or so, because the humidity and the clouds build up, the moisture from the
Right.
Gulf builds up and eventually causes thunderstorms. Um, So your temperatures drop because it's raining, or because it's overcast. But we haven't had that. We've had a lot of high pressure systems over us.
Mm.
So it's been very hot, very dry all summer long. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because, of course, the Saints once again are doing training camp in Metairie. They sell tickets now. No, I'm sorry, you can't sell tickets. They give tickets away, um, for the practices so they can control how many people come out to see
Hmm.
them practice. And they've got the tents set up, the fans and the cooling stations and everything else for everybody to sit and watch practice. But I don't think these players are quite ready for this heat.
No.
And I would not be surprised if there were more indoor practices, the ones that they don't have tickets sold for fans on the weekends and stuff, than outdoor ones, just because of the way they treat the heat nowadays. And lacrosse reminding me of that. Part of the reason why the Saints went and trained up in lacrosse is because it was cooler up there and it was
Hmm.
drier and they can get more work in. Um, again, training camp has changed a lot since the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s. That people are a lot more conscious about the heat, a lot more water breaks, a lot fewer padded practices, a lot less physical practices. So it's just a matter of managing being out in the heat. Um, and the Saints are able to do a training camp in their facility because they have an indoor facility now. Um, Whereas before it was always outdoors, always at a college campus or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so I was curious to see what the weather was like up there because Peyton took them to the Greenbrier for 3 straight years. Great weather for the
Hmm.
practices. People were like complaining that it was too soft for
Yeah.
them.
And I actually remember I went to training camp all 3 years they were at Greenbrier. 2015 I was there every day, but maybe two or three. But I remember in 2014. Yeah, what I loved about Greenbrier is it was extremely intimate for the fans. You could actually have conversations, with a lot of the players if you caught them at the right time afterward. Yeah, and I found myself in a conversation with Pierre Thomas. Now Pierre, I forget where Pierre grew up, but I know he played collegiately at Illinois. And of course, 2014 was one of the last years of his career, if not the last.
Mhm.
Uh, and I'd asked him. I asked him if he liked it, if he liked it better up north, practicing up north. And he didn't. I didn't even get the question out of my mouth. He goes, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "Hell yeah." He goes, "I'm not gonna melt up here." The training camp practicing up here could extend my career. Um, and other players would say the same thing when I'd have the honor to get a quick word with them. And I know when the Pittsburgh Steelers they still practice at a college. They practice at Latrobe St. Vincent's College.
Mhm.
And I'm not even 100% sure if St. Vincent's has an indoor facility, but I do know that the Steelers practice outdoors nearly every single day, unless weather is extremely bad, like causes a complete rainout. And there are other teams, that Washington, still practices in Landover, Maryland. I'm pretty sure, anyway. A lot of their practices are outdoors as well. The humidity just doesn't get as bad up here.
Mhm.
Where the players could realistically get used to it, and you could still get a lot more things accomplished in practice.
Yeah, the Saints for a long time under John Meekum used to practice at Vero Beach, Florida, which is where the Dodgers do their summer training camp. And that's south of Disney World. So imagine being at Disney World, not on the asphalt, but in that grass with the humidity and that hot weather, and you're running training camps out there. But John Meekum liked it because he could dock his yacht over there
Right.
in Miami. He can go off and go out cruising for a couple hours, and it's not a lot of nightlife around Vero Beach. It's a very touristy town. It's why the Dodgers used to like to go there.
Yeah.
Um, and then when uh, Tom Benson bought the team in '85 and '86, they first went up to Ruston and then they went to Hammond. And that's the '86 training camp was the one Bobby Aber thought they were going to die because it's just as hot and just as humid as it is on the South Shore, but it was up in the North Shore. And I think they had chicken every day and the players had an open revolt because they said no more chicken. I mean, how many ways can you cook chicken? They wanted something different. And Bobby said, Jim Mora was trying to whip this team into shape. He was trying to establish his authority. So it was very physical practices, and Bobby's just like, you're killing us, man. And actually, Moore ended up saying that he felt that him driving the players so hard in '87 and '88 and even in 1990 and '91, he felt an impact. Had an impact towards the end of the season with these teams
Mhm.
getting tired by the time they got to the playoffs. Because it was such physical, intense practice. But yeah, that's why they went up to lacrosse to try and alleviate that the weather consideration. And don't you know? Okay, so the Saints run a training camp in Thibodeau, and I think they did one more in New Orleans. And then Sean Payton's first year, he brought him over to Mississippi College or
Mhm.
Millsaps, one of those two colleges, and he does the same thing. We're going to establish authority in here. This team got soft. We're going to make this a physical training camp, and I'm going to show this team I mean business and all that. And you know that team kind of, even though it got to the NC Championship game, Sean Payton learned I pushed him too hard. I need to dial it back. So he started doing the fun thing. So that's the part of training camp I always find interesting. That they these new coaches come in and they want to establish their authority. This is not the same old tired coach you dealt with before. I'm going to make this a physical camp. And some people said that last year that's what Dennis Allen didn't do, and they felt that was the problem with the team, that they
Mhm.
got soft. It was too soft, too relaxed of a camp. That's why they looked slow coming out of the gate. So it's interesting, all these conspiracy theories about the importance of camp. And that's why I brought up the Greenbrier, because I thought the Greenbrier was I thought the Greenbrier was a nice place for them to practice.
Yeah.
I liked the idea of a low humidity, because it's not about the intensity of the work. It's about the amount of work they get in.
Mhm.
And if they're making mistakes, because heat does cause you to make mistakes because
Sure.
it's harder to concentrate. But if they're making mistakes in cooler weather, you're taking the excuse away.
Yep.
Focus. You got to
Yep.
focus. It's football is so much more of a mental game than it used to be.
Oh, no doubt about it. And remember those 3 years at Greenbrier, they didn't spend the entire training camp there. They'd spend the first 2 weeks there, and then the remainder of training camp and the back half of the preseason, they'd be back down in Louisiana. And I agree with you. That it's not. Yeah, that it did allow for the more mental aspect of the game to play in, because you don't want these guys to wait. Yeah, you want them to be in shape. Yeah, you want to work them hard. But regardless of where you're practicing nowadays, because of the collective bargaining agreement, even if coaches want to work their teams hard, they really can't. And if you ask me, training camps throughout the league are soft, because I'm not calling the players soft, but the training camps are soft. If you're like you and I, and would attend training camps back in the day, the two-a-days, the infamous Oklahoma drills. These guys would start off like a high school basketball practice doing wind sprints up and down the field and then get into their work. You're not going to see that kind of thing in the NFL probably ever again. So no, I don't think the Greenbrier is what made them soft. I think the personnel moves are what made this team soft.
Yeah. You look at that defensive alignment for 2014, 2015, 2016. That's why they lost. It wasn't because they didn't practice hard enough. It was just did not have very talented players at key
Mhm.
positions, and that's why you lost these games. The same with the injuries too. The injuries, these guys take care of themselves year round. It's not
Hmm.
like how it was in the 70s and the 80s, early 80s, where these guys came to training camp to get into shape.
Yeah.
They practice, they work out, they do all the things they need to do all year long to get in, to stay in this shape. Um, so it's more of an education thing for camp now.
Hmm.
And guys that are fighting for their jobs or fighting for a roster spot, they're doing it because they need to show they can still play or they can play, not so much that they can go up there and go get beat up on by the old veteran. We're going to teach that rookie, what's going on. It's not like that anymore. It really isn't. Um, it reminds me when you said two a days, it reminds me of Hank Stram. So
Hmm.
Hank Stram came in 1976, and he had the bright idea to do three a days. They did a practice in the morning. And it was all padded. Practice in the morning, practice in the afternoon, and then at 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night, they would do one more practice.
Hmm.
Well, they do this all training camp. They come out in the first preseason game. They played six preseason games back then because it was a 14-game schedule. They played six preseason games, and I think it was the first or second preseason game. They were just getting their ass kicked, and it was quiet in the locker room. And one of the players said, I'm really glad we did these three a days because imagine how much worse we would have got our asses kicked if we didn't do that third practice. And it kind of broke the tension of the room, but it did teach, the guys something that, hey, this is you practicing a third time in pads, physical doesn't get you a, a better player. It's your natural ability that makes you a better player,
Yeah.
and your ability to stay healthy makes you a better player. So, yeah, I know. The only problem I have with the softer practices, but and it's not even a practice anymore because I think it's just the types of players they have nowadays. Um, Tackling is a lost art,
Yes.
and that's the one thing I think I miss about padded practices that, guys practicing tackling, wrapping up, bringing down, that's just not there anymore. So many
No, it's
players are,
not. But it's not, but you and I both know that this problem, the fundamentals, of the game, just aren't being properly taught and properly executed, all the way back to even pre-high school. Before these kids get to high school, and it's never
Mhm.
the fundamental flaws are never corrected. Uh, but yeah, but you're right. It doesn't give coaches the opportunity to correct these fundamental flaws. Specifically when it comes to tackling, because you don't do it. And I almost feel bad for a player that comes into the league out of college, a late round draft choice or an undrafted guy. For those guys that aren't real athletic, but just make their bones because they are just physical, mean players. To me, they have one strike against them
Mhm.
going into training camp. The odds are already against them making a roster because they're so unheralded coming in. Now they don't get to showcase their best attributes because you're not allowed to do that kind of stuff in training camp anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, think about, Mean Joe Green. The Steelers talked to, I think it's the 74 Steelers America's game. They talk about Joe Green when he first comes into the league, and the veterans are like, we're going to show him. And this is 1969. So it's, they're veterans, but they have not been a good team for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Green threw those guys around like rag dolls, and Ray Mansfield, who was a center in those teams, just like, whoa, we got somebody we've never had to deal with before. And I think about that with Trevor Penning because that's Penning's game. Penning's game
Mm-hmm.
is being mean and nasty and physical, playing to the echo of the whistle, that kind of thing. And that is a strike against him. And that I've seen fans be critical of that,
Yeah.
saying that well, he's probably a penalty waiting to happen because he does play like that. But you do you encourage that behavior. Coaches want to see that kind of stuff at game time. It, it's not something you can just flip off with a switch. It's a motivation. It's the way they learn to play. So um, I I'm curious to see how Penning comes out this year as his second year in the league. Not still feeling like he's got to prove something. How is he going to go up against, say, a Peyton Turner, or how is he going to go up against Foskey or Brian Brzee if Brzee is lined up outside? Say they're running some kind of NASCAR package and they want to try him at defensive end because that's something they might do.
Hmm.
How does he deal with that stuff? Because he's still learning. He still feels like he's got to prove to himself, the team, the fans that he was worth the first round draft pick.
Yeah, and the Saints themselves, they need to see that investment. They need Trevor Penning to develop quickly at left tackle because that's why they invested in him.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like we've said time and time again, Hurst is serviceable, but Penning could potentially take your offensive line to the next level. They let Teron Armstead go and drafted Trevor Penning for a reason. And there are going to be growing pains there, especially in pass blocking. Physically, I think he has it. I mean, I love how agile he is on his feet. He has a good football IQ, so he's going to pick it up. But the Saints need him to pick it up quickly. Derek Carr needs him to develop quickly. And if you don't have those repetitions, the iron sharpens iron approach, I want to see, I'm like you, I want to see Penning matched up against Brzee, Cam Jordan, Foskey, Carl Granderson, all those guys. Demario Davis on a blitz, how's he handle that? How's he react to it?
Mm-hmm.
Because the more the more Penning gets of that in practice, the further developed he's going to be once the as the saying goes, once the bullets start flying for real.
And I'm glad you said that because I'm not worried about him run blocking because I think that's what he's built to do. I
Mm-hmm.
think he's built to just run people over, throw that famous footage from the Carolina game where he's throwing that guy out on out the club. He's built like a bouncer and he loves to do that.
Mm-hmm.
He's this is he is the kind of guy that should have been on the movie Roadhouse
Yes.
with Patrick Swayze because that's his mentality. I'm a bar bouncer. I'm throwing you out. And yeah, I'm gonna be nice, but until it's time not to be nice. And
Mm-hmm.
when that whistle goes to start the play, it's not that it's the time not to be nice. But his pass protection is what's critical. His pass protection's got to be what he needs to get better at because that's where he has to show he's got good recovery speed. He can shadow, he can mirror, he can box, all those things that a because a pass defense, you're actually going backwards. You're on your heels. You're not attacking that defensive lineman. You're letting that defensive lineman get momentum to come up and get you.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's where I want to see the improvement. And I think that's where he needs to show the most growth to show he's ready to be an every down starter and be the all pro player I think he has potential to be.
Yeah, and like we said,
Speak,
the Saints need him to be that, and need it to happen quickly.
Last thing. Oh, by the way, this is from 2002. This is the game that Aaron Brooks injures his shoulder. Um, and this is where the season go. Oh, look, there's Jake. This is where the season went south. They win this game. They win the next week against Baltimore. The only other time they ever beat Baltimore in the
Mm-hmm.
in Baltimore too. Um, but they win the game against Baltimore, but then that shoulder injury, it turns out to be an AC joint, goes downhill after that. So, and it costs them a playoff spot. Because look at their record. They're 8-4. They only got to win one more game or two more
Yep.
games. They win one. They got to win two more games. They're in the playoffs as a wild card team, and they beat who ends up winning the Super Bowl. They beat the defending champions, those guys, twice that year. They swept them. So yeah. Oh, and don't you just love those jerseys? Don't you, the throwbacks, the 67 throwbacks? That's the Reebok ones. Those look better than the Nike ones.
Oh yeah.
I love those jerseys. I love them. But yeah, I want to see. I want to see that. I want to see Peyton Turner. And we all snicker, and we pretty much written him off as a bust. But to me, I got to see what Peyton Turner can do. I really do. I need to see if he is worth anything. Oh, by the way, this game's for you, buddy, behind you. This is from, there he is, from 1995. This is the 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 uh, um the the here we are. Saints versus the Dolphins, 1995. Marino's injured. He's out for the year with a torn Achilles tendon. But Jim Everett beats Bernie Kosar in this game. They even run Dan McGuire as the quarterback at one point because Kosar injures his finger. And they got some balls that lay on the ground and stuff. It really, and great catches by Quinn Early too. Great catches. This was the first win of that season. They started 0-5. They're 0-5 going into this game, and Jim Everett lays some balls out for Quinn Early, and he makes some great catches. Wesley Walls too. But it's a fun win. It's a fun win for this team. And a lot of people in the stands for an 0-5 team. I tell you what, it's not like an empty stadium. But yeah, Dan Marino, they show him on the sideline at one point. He's got jams on. You remember jams?
I do.
Those wild tiger stripe pants, and then with the team colors. Oh yeah, the quintessential 1990s game here. I'll tell you what. But yeah, Scott Mitchell's not on this team. That's why I know it's 95, because Scott Mitchell's already playing for the Detroit Lions. Oh, the third string quarterback, Doug Peterson, the coach now of the Jaguars, because they even show him at one point talking to Schuler on the sidelines, because when Dan McGuire is terrible.
Right.
He really was. And it's like, okay, they got to go to Peterson or not, or is Kosar coming back in? So it's an entertaining game. But I put this one on just for you because it's your boy Jim Everett. He has a good game. I think this is one of the pretty throws he has. Yeah. And it's such a shame that he didn't get to play.
Yeah.
He didn't get to go to the playoffs or have a playoff caliber team because this is why this game is around. Chip Low-Miller, and that's how I also know this is the year. This is 94, not 95. I'm sorry. Because this is Chip Low-Miller replacing Morton Anderson. And he misses a bunch of field goals. He's a nightmare. He really is, and the fans are on his ass. So anyway. Bob, what do you have going on for the show tomorrow night with the Bayou Blitz?
I'm actually glad you reminded me because I completely forgot. Brendan, Brendan and I had some scheduling conflicts, so this week's Bayou Blitz will actually be Thursday night. I am not 100% sure we're going to have any guests yet. I've been in some talks, but given the personnel moves, we already have a lot to talk about, so I don't know yet if we'll have any guests or not. If we do, the a wide receiver that you just mentioned playing in this game is one possibility. If he's not on this week, he will be on very, very soon with us. Uh, we're also going to talk about the NFL Network started their always bogus and always laughable top 100 players of 2022 that's allegedly voted on by the players. One notable New Orleans Saint missed the 100 cut altogether. Another one was just announced. They're doing it. They're announcing them by tens, one day at a time. I did an article. Jamal Williams, who of course didn't play with the Saints last year, but he cracked the list at 95, I believe. Another New Orleans Saint made the list today. When the announcement came out today, I'll publish an article about that tomorrow. We're gonna poke fun a little bit at the NFL Network's top 100 a little bit as well.
Yeah, I used to be into the top 100. The first couple years I did it because it was actually rather legitimate,
Yeah.
but it's become a popularity contest.
Oh yeah.
It I think, and going back to the top of the show, I think the year that Jimmy Graham didn't even make the list, he had double-digit touchdowns. He had 1,000 yards receiving, and he doesn't even make the list. I'm like, that's it.
Yep.
This is ridiculous.
Yep.
100 players. He's not better than 100 players, or not even in the top 100. That's just ridiculous. Completely absurd. Yeah, there it is. There he is. Look at those pants. Oh man.
Jim actually has a picture posted. It was his cover photo for a while. He actually has a picture posted of it was a promotional shoot with all the league's top quarterbacks. Him, Elway, Marino, Moon, Jim Kelly, et cetera, et cetera, and all of them were posing with their jams. As I forget what movie, but the saying goes, "Oh my, the colors."
I mean, this is back when I think let's see, Champion is doing the Saint jersey. I don't know who it is. I think that's Wilson that's doing what a interception. Threw it right to him. I think Wilson's doing the jersey for I can't make out that logo for the Dolphins. Starter used to do a lot of jerseys. The era of Starter. I mean, I can remember the commercials. Everybody had starter jackets, and back then I worked at a place called Foot Action, which is like the knockoff of Foot Locker.
Right.
And oh my God, when we get the new Jordans and the new starter jackets in, you couldn't. I mean, they would be lined up out the door to get those damn things.
Yep.
So yeah, that was back in the day, as the kids say. Chip Lower Mill missed another extra point. Unbelievable. Look at that. Look at that. Hey, have you seen the Broncos are going to release this year their icy outfits, which is basically the all-white jersey and pants, but now they have a white helmet. And fans are like, Bronco fans like, just put the blue helmet with the old logo on, and you're good. This is what we used to wear on the road,
Right.
And then at home, put the orange jersey, the blue logo, and the white pants. Just go with that. So that led to a whole discussion on Twitter about the best looking uniforms, and pretty much everybody has the attitude of the best uniforms were in the 70s and the 80s up until the mid 90s when Starter was making a lot of these things like that. But he says after that, it got terrible. And look at this uniform the Dolphins have. I mean, that's a good uniform. I love the logo. It got the logo on the sleeve like you should. It's just a good blue colored pants. I mean, just looks good. Keith Byers right there. Bernie Parmalee. I could hear Chris Berman. He would do the old Jewish voice for Bernie Parmalee. But yeah, I mean, it's just that's the other reason I like watching these old games is because I get to see good uniforms
Yep.
again, not these
Yep.
ugly uniforms. So I'm glad you got that jacket. I really would like to get some old Saints throwback stuff, but from the '70s, not from the early days, the '60s. Um, anyway, thank you guys for sticking with us with all the internet glitches tonight. I apologize as always. I promised Bob I'd try and keep it under an hour. I got it to an hour 15, so I'm getting better. But and I guess we had about 15 minutes worth of stops and starts anyway.
Yeah.
Check out Bob's show tomorrow night. Bob will not be here next week. He's going on a well-deserved vacation. I know it's training camp. How can you go on vacation? You should go on vacation beforehand, but he's going on a well-deserved break. I will be here next week. I may have his co-host for the from the Bayou Blitz on with me tomorrow next week, but I'm not sure. Don't want to hold that. Don't. I'm put that in sand right now, not in stone, but in sand. But in the meantime, we will have a show tomorrow night. Until then, training camp officially kicks off tomorrow. First padded practice on Friday. Football season's on us, guys, and we're going to have lots of content to talk about. In the meantime, thank you, Bob, for sticking with us. Thank all you guys for sticking with us, and we'll see you next time on Under the Dome. Good night, everybody.